So, get this. You have a local mayor, but her past is, well, it's a total mystery. And then suddenly, she's at the heart of a massive national security investigation. This thing just exploded, and it's not really about one person anymore. It's about how much power our government has versus the rights of a single citizen. It all ended up in this huge constitutional showdown. Let's dig into how we even got here. And believe it or not, this whole massive nationwide controversy, it all comes down to this one document. This is the official Supreme Court decision, GR No. 274351, Alice Guo versus the Senate of the Philippines. This is the paper trail that shows how one person's very strange story became this huge test of our government's power. All right, so where did all this even begin? The story of Mayor Alice Guo kind of came out of nowhere, right? But it escalated fast. We're not just talking about local politics here. We're talking about huge questions about citizenship, about crime, even national security. I mean, these issues got so big that the Philippine Senate itself had to step in. And when I say it escalated quickly, I mean really quickly. Look at this timeline. It all kicks off with a police raid on a POGO compound. That's a Philippine offshore gaming operator. A few weeks later, Mayor Guo's name gets thrown into the mix. But the real turning point? That was in May, when she testified before the Senate. Her testimony just raised a million more questions. And just 2 months after that, she's filing a petition with the Supreme Court. That's a wild ride. You see, the Senate hearings weren't just about these POGO hubs. The questions got personal, like really personal. Who are your parents? Where did you go to school? And then the big one, are you a spy? Can you imagine? Some senators were flat out asking if she was a Chinese spy. And that line of questioning is exactly what lit the fuse for this whole legal firestorm. Okay, so let's flip this around for a second. Let's look at it from the Senate's perspective. Why on earth did they think they had the right to ask these kinds of questions? Well, it all boils down to a very specific power they have, granted to them right in the Constitution. And this is the key phrase right here, inquiry in aid of legislation. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. It's the power Congress has to investigate stuff so they can, write better laws. It's not supposed to be a trial. Think of it more like a fact-finding mission so they can do their jobs as legislators. And to be fair, the Senate was pretty clear about its official goals. They said this whole inquiry was about a few things. First, figuring out how to regulate POGOs. Second, tackling human trafficking. Third, looking into serious crimes like illegal detention. And finally, and this is the big one, examining threats to our national security. Now, this quote from the Supreme Court's decision really tells you everything you need to know about how broad this power is. The court basically says that this investigative power has to have wide latitude. Why? Because if it doesn't, Congress can't really do its job. How can you make good laws if you can't get the information you need? It would seriously handicap them. But from Mayor Guo's point of view, the Senate had taken that wide latitude and just run with it, way too far. She felt like she was being backed into a corner, condemned in public. So she did something pretty extraordinary. She decided to challenge a co-equal branch of government, taking her fight all the way to the nation's highest court. And this was really the heart of her entire case. She argued that these Senate hearings had crossed a very important line. They weren't an inquiry in aid of legislation anymore. She said they had turned into a full-blown criminal prosecution and that she was being treated like a defendant on trial. So in her petition, she claimed that the Senate's actions were violating some of her most basic, fundamental constitutional rights. We're talking about the right to due process, the right to a fair hearing, and also her right to privacy and even her personal security. This slide right here, this really just boils the whole conflict down to its essence. You've got the Senate on one side saying, hey, we're just doing our jobs. We're gathering facts to make better laws for the country. And then you have Guan on the other side saying, no way. Your goal is to persecute me. You're putting me on trial by publicity to find me guilty. That's the core tension the Supreme Court had to untangle. So what you have here is a classic constitutional dilemma. You've got two super powerful co-equal branches of government, the legislature and the judiciary, and they're on a collision course. So let's see how the court tried to navigate this really delicate balance of power. And this really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Can the Supreme Court just step in and stop the work of the Senate, another co-equal branch of government? I mean, under the whole principle of separation of powers, one branch isn't supposed to interfere with another. So what gives the Supreme Court the authority to even hear this case, let alone tell the Senate what to do? Well, the answer is in this doctrine: expanded judicial review. This is a special power the Philippine Constitution gives to the courts. It basically makes the judiciary the ultimate referee. It's their job to step in if any branch of government goes too far, if it commits what's called a grave abuse of discretion or acts beyond its constitutional limits. So, using that exact power, the court decided, yep, we're taking this case. And they explain why, citing its transcendental importance. In other words, this wasn't just about Mayor Guo anymore. This was about the balance of power in our government and the rights of every citizen. Plus, it involved what they called novel questions of law. New, tricky legal questions that needed a final answer. All right, so the stage is set. After hearing all the arguments from both sides, the Supreme Court finally delivered its ruling. Let's break down exactly what they decided, piece by piece. Okay, so question number 1 for the court: did the Senate violate Guo's right to due process? Remember, she was arguing that the hearing felt just like a criminal trial, but she didn't have any of the protections a defendant would normally get. So did the court agree that her right to a fair process was trampled on? The court's answer is right here in this quote. They make it super clear. They emphasize that these legislative inquiries, they're their own special thing. The legal term is sui generis. They are not criminal proceedings. Their whole purpose is different. It's to gather information to see if new laws are needed. So the final verdict on the due process question was a big, fat no. The court's logic was simple. Since a legislative inquiry isn't a criminal trial, the rights you'd have as a criminal defendant don't apply in the same way. In their eyes, Guo was there as a resource person to give information, not as an accused person to be judged guilty or innocent. Okay, so due process is off the table. But what about her right to privacy? I mean, the Senate was putting all her personal info out there for the world to see. Her birth certificate, her finances, you name it. Surely that crossed the line, right? And again, this quote from the decision really nails the court's thinking on the privacy issue. They basically say that when you become a public officer, your right to privacy, well, it gets limited. You can't just use it as a shield to stop the publication of things that are matters of public interest. And that led directly to the final verdict on her privacy claim. Another no. The court found that Guo's personal background was, and I'm using their exact words here, inextricably intertwined with the whole investigation into POGOs and national security. In a situation like that, they said, the public's right to know simply outweighs her personal right to privacy. So in the end, this case gives a huge green light to the Senate's powerful investigative tools. It reaffirms just how broad their power is. But it leaves us with this massive, crucial question, doesn't it? Where exactly do you draw the line between a necessary investigation and a trial by publicity? This ruling tells us what the law is, but it doesn't quite tell us how to walk that line. And figuring that out, well, that's a challenge that's left for all of us.